to them. Children of the night, what music they make.
Welcome back to Scored to Death, the podcast, the official companion podcast to the book Scored to Death, Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers. My name is J. Blake Fischera, and the book is available from Silman James Press. It features 14 in-depth interviews with renowned film music composers that have made significant contributions to horror and have worked with some of the genre's greatest filmmakers. It is available on Amazon and from other book retailers. The goal of both the book and this podcast is to explore the craft of film scoring and celebrate the amazing composers that do it. Today's episode is part 2 of a detailed discussion with composer and synth innovator Christopher L. Stone. In part 1, Chris and I discussed his work in creating sound effects for the films Big Wednesday and Phantasm, as well as the television series Battlestar Galactica and Knight Rider. We also discussed his work as a composer in the Phantasm film franchise, and his collaborations with composer Richard Band on the films Terror Vision, From Beyond, and Prison. This week we will continue our discussion about the Phantasm films, and the differences between visceral and methodical composers, working with John Landis on The Stupids, and much, much more. We've got a lot to get to, so let's get started. I know for a lot of the composers that I've spoken to that work on multiple installments of a series, and kind of in their mind, a lot of the way they identify each installment is like what new piece of equipment they used for that.
Oh, yeah.
For that film. Do you find that is that true for you as well?
Yeah, it's not so much new equipment as now it's new plugins.
Yeah.
I guess you could call that equipment. But, you know, it's all plug-in based. Now, I went through and I purged my studio of all outboard gear. Now, I don't have a single piece of outboard gear except for, the converter, the D-Day converter, which you have to have as an outboard gear. That and a set of microphones. And now it's just nothing more than a keyboard, 3 screens, and, surround speakers. That's it. There are times where I could, if I had to go down, I could take my entire studio, put it in the back of the car, and bring it wherever I need it. I don't need. I mean, before that, I mean, I had racks and racks and racks of gear and so on. But that's all gone. I don't use any of that anymore, except for the vocoder. I have it in plug-in, but I don't like it, so I use a hardware vocoder whenever I need to use that. But other than that, it's pretty darn simple. So gear-wise, no, I'll definitely get whatever the some latest greatest plugins are. You collect those, like collect baseball cards. But that would be the equivalent there of gear.
With Phantasm 2 coming right on the heels of Prison, was that also a project done with the Waveframe, or you were working with another piece of equipment then?
Well, I don't remember. I was probably working with emulator 2s at that point. It was probably more expedient. I just took all the sounds off the Waveframe and put it into the emulators because it was just more expedient. The emulator, the Waveframe was a massive brick. It was like it was almost like a 3 foot by 3 foot black cube. And the emulators, I had them stacked in the corners. It was just easier to use those. Probably. I don't remember.
Now, my other podcast is kind of based on nostalgia, and so we do talk about things like some of the horror movies and science fiction movies you're talking about. And though it's more film-based, I think a lot of people that would listen to my other podcast would be very interested to hear that you wrote a lot of music for TaleSpin.
I wrote all the music for TaleSpin. Yeah, you go.
How did you come to start working with Disney, and what was it like working with them on a daily television show compared to the projects that we've already discussed?
That was the most hands-off project I probably ever worked in my life. They would just say, well, here's $1 million. give us scores. Bye. That was it. That was it. Oh yeah, they're probably down once to take a look at some storyboards in the early stages. That was it. And I would just go out and record it and bring it back. Well, that was done. A lot of that was done with some very big orchestra stuff because I had the budget for it. So I did, some very large recording sessions at the Sony studios, which was MGM back then. It was using like 70-piece orchestras, stuff like that for that show.
Yeah.
That had a very, very hefty budget, and it was extremely hands off, and never really spoke to very many people at all. They just handed me a check, I handed them music. Simple as that.
And so you had no guidance into like what kind of language the music was going to be, what the feel was of the show. I mean, other than looking at storyboard.
Yeah, they said we want a big orchestral score, and just hear the episodes and just do it. That was very, very unusual. It would never happen today. Never, ever, never. It would be temp. There'd be temp score all over the place. Have you ever heard the expression that composers have been using for a while called "the temp is God"?
I've heard temp love.
Well, that's another one. Well, temp love, yeah, it's a disease that afflicts directors, writers, producers, everyone else. That is it's a communicable disease that is inflicted on composers, right up there with any other horrible disease. And I say that because it really just destroys your ability to even remember how to compose if all you're doing is doing the monkey see, monkey do thing. It's really horrible what has gone on with that. And in today's world, had we been hired to do TaleSpin today, it would have had temp score all over the place. They just would have said, follow the temp, don't do anything else but follow the temp, or you're fired.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the way 99.9% of all music is written now.
Yeah.
It's very sad, but that's the reality. So I kind of got in at the tail end of that with TaleSpin. So I was blessed by not being stuck in that quagmire following the temp for every single thing.
Now, that was part of a Disney afternoon lineup where there were other shows that were already established, like DuckTales and stuff. So was there any thought of trying to create some kind of unity with the sound with those things, or just go off on your own and just create?
Just go off my own thing and create, basically. After that I played them like the first couple of themes or something like that, and after that I said, okay, fine, let's just do this, give us more of the same, send in the music on time, and that's the end of that.
When you're working on that many episodes and creating that much music, even though it's only a half-hour show, so it's probably clocking in at 22 and a half minutes of actual show, and you're not scoring the whole entire thing. But when there's that much stuff that you have to create, is a chunk of that just using what you've already written, and do you have to re-record that, or you just use like the exact recordings when you are using some of the more familiar themes?
Well, when it came to the big battle themes, battle scenes, things like that, that's when I'd drag out music from the orchestra stuff that I would do. I had like 2-3 hours of orchestra stuff. They were big bombastic fight scene orchestra. They had a lot of battle scenes and where balloon would be flying through the air and doing all that stuff, and there'd be a whole bunch of things like that. So on the larger stuff like that, yeah, I would bring out the big guns on those. Now, when it came to some of the repartee stuff, like when there'd be like little comedic movements and things like that, and where there were some things where you could never use a library approach. There'd be some of like the slapstick stuff that would go on. There'd be little tiny movements. They'd go from place to place and do something, and so you have to score those individually. And those I would do electronically.
Before TaleSpin came around, how often were you working with live orchestras of that size?
On movies, here and there, not in television. None of the TV things that I did require. That was the only time, except when I was working on on Walker, Texas Ranger, where they would do like specials. They had some things where Walker went back into the past and was a sheriff, was a marshal in the past. And those I did. I scored those with live orchestra. So it would depend on the size of the movie and the budget and so on. But it was rare for television to have that kind of budget.
I mean, because I just imagine for myself, I'm a semi-professional, more amateur musician, but certainly not trained like you are. But even having that kind of classical training, I mean, I would imagine that, especially in the beginning, was it intimidating to have to work with that many people and have to kind of be the captain of that ship?
No, I was trained for it.
But even with training, there's no, I don't know.
The only thing like that you could say is that every now and again, before a session, I would have a recurring nightmare where I would show up on the session and there was no music at all on the stands, and that sinking feeling that you weren't going to be able to make your deadline. I have absolutely no fear of getting in front of a large group of people. If I'm the guy, if someone says, "Oh my God, someone's got to come up here on the stage and suddenly say something," and it's being televised around the world, and there's like 5,000 people sitting in the audience or 100,000, I'm fine with that. Just put me on the microphone. I'm there. I don't have any stage fright, and I don't have any fear of conducting at any time for any reason. It's because I had it so well ingrained. There's no ounce of me that has any doubt or fear of doing any of that. The only doubt and fear you might have is, oh my God, am I going to meet my deadline?
Yeah.
That's the only one. Not of working with the orchestra, not with working with conducting or anything like that. Not for me. Now I know a lot of people have conducting angst, but I studied conducting for years and years and years before I had to get up in front of an orchestra that was doing my own music. So it never bothered me.
Yeah.
Never occurred to me to be anxious about it.
With someone who, in a case like that, or with a television show, and especially in lower budget cinema where time is always of the essence with deadlines and stuff, do you get writer's block? And if so, do you have any tips for anybody else who writes music that might be helpful to help them kind of get out of it?
Oh, that is a really, really good question. I'm going to give a very disappointing answer.
Okay.
I have never in my life experienced writer's block. There's always a way out. And there's so many ways. If you're, there have been times I've looked at a scene and I'm going, what the hell am I going to do with this?
Sure.
It's not the same as writer's block. It's just looking at it and going, wow, what am I going to do? And I'll be honest with you, the one thing that temps, as much as I abhor temp scores, there are huge benefits to it if it's done by somebody that really understands music editing and really understands how to score. The biggest problem, I'm digressing, but I'll come back to this point. The biggest problem with temp scores is, yes, first of all, it's demeaning as hell to show a composer temp score and say, here, copy this. Imagine going to Rembrandt and saying, here's this Picasso. I don't want you to use your style. I just want you to copy Picasso. Can you imagine? The guy's just going to look at you and go, I'm Rembrandt, dude.
Yeah.
Well, okay, obviously I'm not in Rembrandt's category, but the feeling's the same nonetheless.
Yeah.
All right. The feeling of being demeaned,
Yeah, I understand that, but don't you think that, I totally understand, and I've talked to close to 20 of you guys that work in this industry now, so I understand where that kind of frustration comes from, and I totally think it's warranted. But at the same time, like myself, my day job is as an editor, and I know that, with under the same kind of pressures of deadline and stuff, you have to get things moving. And when you're working with somebody that have specific rhythms in mind, it's sometimes you need those to get through scenes so that they can be handed to you as a composer.
Who's you? You need him. You say you need him. Who is the you in this scenario?
I guess me, an editor.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. No. Look. First of all, as an editor, you understand. First of all, there's no way you can show a cut to the suits without having temp score behind it.
Yeah.
They're not going to get it. They're going to say, "Oh, this is going on too long. You're going to have to cut it down." You know that. It's going to drive you crazy. So obviously, while you're working, you have to have temp score because you can't show something to the suits without a temp score in it. It's not possible.
Yeah.
You know that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you agree?
Yes, totally.
Okay. So I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that when a composer is forced to follow them like a lemming going off a cliff,
sure,
that's the problem. And with all due respect, here's the reason why temp scores are kind of bad being done by editors. In that, I hope you're not going to be offended by this.
I very likely won't be. So feel free.
The problem with editors putting in temp scores is that they're coming at it from the perspective of an amateur composer.
Sure.
And what happens is that editors that I've worked with in the past have a tendency to go and make a beeline for the cliches of scoring. And then you end up coming up with something that is, it's not that it's not working, it's not that it's not bad, but it's not exactly innovative, not exactly like something that could be done better by somebody who really understands how to steer clear of the cliches.
Yeah.
That was the thing that I loved about Jerry Goldsmith's writing, is that he knew how to write something that was familiar, but he had this innate sense of steering clear from anything that was a cliche. And brilliant in that regard. The other problem is that when you get temp scores, editors will tend to put together what I would call a smorgasbord approach, where you'll get, all of a sudden, you'll have some jazz band. In the next scene, it will be Bach. The next scene, it will be, Miley Cyrus. The next scene, it will be New World Symphony. The next scene, it's all these genres get mishmashed together. And then when you're told you've got to follow the temp no matter what you do, now you're stuck with all these different palettes. Each one of them costs a freaking fortune.
Yeah.
To do. It's like the classic thing that they say with writers, and in marches the Roman army, and you've got a limited budget, and it says in marches the Roman army in your script.
Yeah.
That's kind of the equivalent of what editors tend to throw at composers.
Sure, yeah.
With temp scores, is they're not thinking, oh, wait a minute, it's budget, which means we've got to stick to a palette that can be used throughout the whole thing. Anyway, enough of that. But the point I was trying to get at is about writer's block and getting around it.
Yeah.
This is where temp scores come in from a composer standpoint.
Sure.
If I really find a scene I can't figure out what the hell to do, then I start looking around for pieces. I'll go to the internet and I'll look at different movies and different approaches, for things, and I'll just temporarily lay in a totally fresh approach, something I wouldn't have thought of,
Yeah.
and look at that and go, oh, that's a cool idea. Okay, I like that idea, that approach, like some of the more off the wall things, like Carter Burwell is just wonderful. I mean, I think he's a great composer because he knows how to throw in really off the wall stuff that works beautifully. And same thing with Thomas Newman, who's like one of my all-time favorite composers because he knows how to really score outside the box,
Yeah.
just really takes a radically different approach, than just the straight ahead. So I'll look to those things for cues to kind of spark my imagination on stuff like that. If it's not in the temp, right, or if there's no temp, and I'll try to think of stuff like that. Failing that, then I go back to the basics. I think, okay, what's the genre? What's the mood? What do I know in my bag of tricks that I can use to at least cover the mood?
Yeah.
So I can never find myself ever in a situation where I've got writer's block because I don't put that much pressure on me to have to be always coming up with the better mousetrap in every instance. I can always look around and try to gather more information that sparks my imagination. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it seems, it's interesting that so many of you, the composers that I've spoken to, so many of them and yourself have so little trouble with it. I mean, but you all have your own ways of keeping the creativity flowing and maybe don't suffer from writer's block in the same sense that most people would define it.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Yeah, it's interesting. For you coming from a classical education, working often in the realm of electronic music and sound effects and stuff, do you find that, let me see, how can I word this? Because it's kind of, I found when I was doing the book, I found that you could almost split the composers into two categories. The ones that could watch a scene and kind of instantly hear music when they watch it. And then it is almost then a matter of just getting it down on paper or in a recording and then working on it from there. But the initial inspiration came to them automatically. And then there were other composers who, I guess for lack of a better term, I would call noodlers, where they would sit and play, maybe look for find a tone on a keyboard or something, and then have that help inspire. But it would be a matter of watching and playing along to it until they find what works and then going from there. Do you find that either one of those categories kind of would describe your method, or do you have some other category that you would put yourself under?
Oh, I would just say the first one for sure. I'm under the, again, you kind of just described what I was describing earlier, difference between a methodical versus a visceral.
Yeah. That's what I kind of thought about when you were talking.
Yeah. Well, I definitely, as soon as I see a picture, I will hear it. As a matter of fact, it's really difficult for me to listen to music in general because I'm always picturing picture behind it.
Yeah.
So as soon as I hear something, I go, oh yeah, I can picture that. That would go here, that would go there. Any piece of music, I just immediately start seeing picture behind it.
Yeah.
I'm definitely a programmatic writer in that, from stem to stern. I can tell you in one very quick way why there are those two types of versus the ones that there's the types that will look at it and see it first time and music will immediately come to their heads. Then there are other ones that have to sit there and noodle, and I can tell you exactly why that is. Why that is, it depends on their keyboard playing skills.
Okay.
If you've got somebody who has spent a lot of time improvising on the piano or improvising on guitar or improvising and doing a lot of improv, they will look at the film and immediately know what to write. Now, if you have the other ones who came, let's say they were a clarinetist or something like that, or a saxophone player and got into film scoring, they're the ones that are going to have to noodle quite a bit because they don't have that subconscious background of doing a lot of improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
So the improvisers, the ones that can play, the ones that can just sit down at the piano and just start playing anything and, whatever, and do all that, and, play piano concerto if they had to, they're going to look at the picture and immediately know what to write.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's going to be the best. It just means they know what to write. You see, like the guys that want to sit down and be methodical can oftentimes come up with something way better only because they're being more methodical about it and they're taking a more pragmatic approach and doing a lot more granularity to a theme.
Yeah.
You're gonna probably end up with thematic development that is a lot more precise in nature by doing it the noodle and methodical way. There's pros and cons to both. The problem with being an improviser is that you will tend to rely on bad habits, which is relying on things that you've done a million times before.
Sure.
Whereas if you're a visceral and somebody has to noodle, it means automatically they're looking for a fresh approach. They're looking for something new. And so I, as a visceral like myself, I have to constantly slap my hands on the wrist and go, no, bad boy. You've done that a million times. Shut up. Start writing something new.
Yeah.
And you understand what I'm saying? So it's a double-edged sword. Yeah, I could, if I had to, if you gave me a movie score and you said, okay, it has to sound like a real good orchestra, and by the way, it's due tomorrow morning at 9:00, I will get it done. Will it be the best score ever written? Hell no.
Yeah.
Will it work? Yeah. Will everything be covered? Will I meet the deadline? You bet. Will it be a cliche? Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? It won't have any of those nuances that you're going to get. I mean, you're not going to get anything like a totally fresh approach. So it's a double-edged sword being a visceral. You have to be very, very careful not to fall into bad habits.
Sure.
It's difficult to do.
Because obviously this podcast and even my book was a lot about just talking about film music in general and process, even though it's under the guise of this like horror music thing. I'm much more interested in you as an artist, but because of the idea of Scored to Death being a horror movie music podcast and a book, part of that stemmed from the fact that I've found being a fan of film music and also specifically horror music, but also seeing that there is a very passionate and loyal audience to horror movies, but also the music. I'm wondering, as someone that has worked from anything from Disney to Walker, Texas Ranger, to documentary music, stuff like that, do you find that the music in horror movies and fantasy kind of plays a different role in the storytelling than in stuff that's maybe more traditional or mainstream?
Wow, that's an extremely good question. You're asking really good questions, by the way. You've done this.
Well, that's the hope, anyway.
A number of interviews, and I must say you're coming up with the best questions I've ever been asked.
Well, I appreciate that.
It shows that you've done this a lot. You really understand this very, 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 very well.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. I think that horror movies are very much akin to movies that were made in terms of how you approach it musically, okay, in terms of the basics.
Sure. Which
is really thematic, okay? Whether you're using a rhythmic potchkey, like whatever, it's still melodic, right? So there are very, very, very few movies outside of Star Wars where it's thematically driven, and because it's not the style in most movies. And Star Wars is really basically a kind of a Flash Gordon throwback. So it's going to have a thematic approach because it's really an old movie style from the 30s being made in modern times. But its heart, it really belongs back to the old movies where the guys in the B-17 shooting at the aircraft and stuff like that. It goes back to that genre back in the late 30s, early 40s, where the theme of a show was very recognizable. Like you would have the battle theme, or you would have the good guy theme or the bad guy theme. Okay, that's almost never done in conventional shows, TV or movies. Very, very rarely do you ever hear like the bad guy's theme coming off stage, and okay, the bad guy's about to come into scene. Never, not now. It doesn't happen. Or the love theme, between the two people. And you got this famous, love theme like that. It doesn't exist in today's genre, but it was the way you did things back then. You always write this person's theme or that person's theme. Well, horror film music is all about creating the themes for the good guy, the bad guy, the chase, the and so really from the core nature of writing for horror music, you're really in its core writing music in the way that music was written back in the 30s and 40s.
Huh. Interesting.
Only you're using modern day colors and modern day genres of music to describe it. But in terms of its core essence, it's really 30s and 40s music, thematic.
Do you have any opinion as to why it seems to have such kind of a loyal fan base? I mean, obviously, we all know sci-fi fans are very loyal, and horror fans, especially, I think, with the advent of the internet and a way for all of us to kind of congregate and communicate with each other and share our like interests, and then especially with social media, I think all of that has a big part to play in kind of the rise in popularity with genre films and stuff in today's age. But is it just the love for the horror film that makes people fanatical for the music, passionate about the music, or is there something about horror film music that maybe plays to the listeners that love these films that make them want to collect it on vinyl and listen to it like it's almost like it's pop music, which doesn't happen that often in other styles of film music?
As a composer, I would love to have the ego to think that it is all about the music, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's an artifact. I think that what's really going on is that people are identifying with a character like a Jason, or like the tall man in Phantasm. These characters, these recurring characters that they can associate with the music. And there are a lot of horror films out there which never really did take off in terms of the scores or even as a franchise, because they didn't necessarily, on those, the ones that did not have a clearly defined protagonist and antagonist probably are not going to be as accessible in terms of the score, in terms of a recurring fan base because of that. And I think that what really goes on is, let's say when you hear, like a theme like the Jason theme, right? What comes to your mind immediately? Well, you see the hockey mask in your head. You see all that stuff in your head. So when you're hearing the music, you can actually pretty much see the film, and to some degree actually create your own movie.
Yeah.
So that you're like getting another installment of the picture every time you hear the music. So I think the two are married together, and I think it really is, the music is an artifact. The fact that that's just a cool genre, you like that character, scares the crap out of you, like it, makes you creep out. So when you hear the music, you can create your own thing in your own mind. And I think I think it's the two that go together, because I really don't think that you're going to have the same response from just a generic horror movie that doesn't necessarily have a clearly defined antagonist and protagonist.
Sure.
I don't care how good the theme is. I don't think you're going to get the following.
Yeah.
I think it's an artifact of the fact that you can picture the scenes, or picture a scene in your head when you listen to the music.
We talked a little bit earlier about simplicity.
Yeah.
And you were just talking about how horror is, in some ways, the style of writing for a horror movie is a little bit of a throwback with the themes of the antagonist and protagonist, which you were just talking about now. Also,
yeah.
I would say simplicity, repetition is also a big thing in all film music to a certain extent, but especially in horror films, I would say, when, we talk about the Halloween theme, or even Williams's theme for Jaws.
Well, actually, that there's a lot of similarity. Look at what Jaws has got. That dum 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 dum. What is the Jason theme? Dee 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 dee. Right. So it's all repeated patterns. So you're onto it there.
But we also, the other place where we see repetition, and then often in a lot of cases, simplicity, not always, is pop music.
Yes, good. Very good point. Very good point.
And I wonder if that also has something to do with why it's, it seems more listenable to some listeners, I guess I should say.
Well, I could get into a really deep conversation about this musically, but because one of my passions is music science, actually, which is understanding how music actually works inside the brain. And I studied some of this quite a bit, actually. Hasn't helped me at all musically, but it's just I'm just very curious about it. Like, why does major make us feel happy and minor make us feel sad?
Sure.
Which is not necessarily true in different cultures. In fact, sometimes quite the opposite. And I find that very fascinating, and I like to find out more and more about it scientifically as to why that is. And so
yeah,
I've done a number of research and reading on this topic. So without going into too much of that, the repetition part of it has a lot to do with how it relates to our heartbeats.
Huh, interesting.
And how it relates to the tempo. 120, for instance, is really the standard walking tempo of your heartbeat. And so that's why 120 has always been a very popular tempo because of that.
Huh.
And so when you have the repetition like that, it's a synchronization, synaptic synchronization with our metabolic rate. And that's one of the reasons why. So it gets you pumping, because what you're going to be, your heart rate's going to go up a little bit when you're frightened in a horror movie. So if you've got a repetition part in there, that's gonna help to synchronize with your metabolic rate. So I didn't want to get too sorry, I didn't need to get too technical about this, but that's one of the main reasons why you need a repetitive rhythmic potchki in there in order for it to really do its thing in a horror movie. Memorable theme. It's a major component of it. Yeah.
Do you have Not necessarily a favorite score or piece of music that you've written, but do you have like a favorite project or like session that you worked, something that's memorable about a specific working experience that you look back on fondly?
Oh yeah, definitely TaleSpin. Hands down. Hands down.
The creative freedom.
Yeah, big orchestra, lots of budget, creative freedom. What's not to like, I mean, it's like somebody hands you $1 million, says just record a bunch of music, go out and do your thing, and they all come back, saying, "Oh, that was great, thanks." They were very appreciative of it. It's not like anyone's going, "Well, I don't know, what are you doing for us now? Where's this money going exactly, Chris?" I didn't get any of that, so that will always go down in my memory so far as being one of the coolest ones. And actually, I would have to, right close to that, would have to be, well, actually, there were 3 that are all pretty much equal. I recorded music for with John Landis for The Stupids movie, which had a very unfortunate demise in the theaters. But the experience of working on that with John Landis was amazing.
Wow.
He really is amazing to work with.
How so?
I was asking principal a cellist, a good friend of mine, what makes a great conductor from just a good conductor of an orchestra? He says, "Oh, that's simple. A great conductor knows when to make a comment, knows when to give people signals and when not to give comment, when not to give signals."
Yeah.
John Landis fits into that. He knew exactly where to let me have my creative freedom, and yet knew exactly where to pinpoint guidance. And it was an overshare, it was an undershare, it was perfect share. And he knew exactly how to do that. And when you're working with new directors, it's always overshare. They don't have the experience to know that you just can't squash people's. It's not all about my vision. Same thing with a composer. A new composer will do the same thing. They'll just go, "Well, I'm not going to have anyone tell me how to write music." I'm like, no, you have to listen, because you really have to listen to what they want. That's, by the way, that's the danger of another danger of being a visceral. It can get you out of trouble in terms of being able to write whatever you need to write whenever you need to. But boy, it is a minefield of problems if you're not careful. And one of the biggest minefields is, sure, it's great. You look at the movie and you hear a piece in your head the moment you see it. One little problem with that may not be what the director's hearing.
Yeah.
And you'd better be able to quickly erase what you just heard and knock that out of your mind as being an indelible ink and start listening to the director mighty quick. So that's the danger of just watching a movie and seeing it, because that's not being collaborative. That's not listening to the director and following your director's wants. That's like massive. That's massively important. You have to do that.
Yeah. So
the people who have to plunk and listen and play, the methodicals, they're going to have a much easier time working with directors, because they're going to listen to them a lot more carefully than the viscerals will, by nature.
Sure.
You know what I'm saying? So it's not all I cracked up to be a visceral. Trust me, it can get you into a lot of trouble, and it did get me into a lot of trouble in the early days until I became aware of the problems that are associated with being a visceral composer.
Yeah.
But that would be I would say John Landis was one of my all-time favorite experiences working with him. We recorded 100-piece plus in London to do the score, unlimited budget. It was a fantastic experience.
Wow.
And then the second one, and the last one, was working with Don on Phantasm 5. It was done over a very long period of time. I had a full year to write the music. No joke, a full year. So I was able to put in, when I wrote the the hour of music ahead, I could really, really, really take my time and go and listen to a whole bunch of different pieces and get some whole bunch of different ideas, and really try to create something very, very, very specific and highly detailed and really granular throughout the movie. There was nothing rushed about it at all.
aside from, you were talking about how in recent years you've kind of changed your method of working and writing not to picture. I mean, I would imagine that can buy you some time because you're not waiting around for a cut and stuff. But aside from that, why were you given so much time on this particular project as opposed to, compared to the other Phantasm films?
They were busy cutting away, and Don brought me in very, very early to start, getting ideas and going to work on it. I mean, I don't think he was aware of the fact that I, changed my method of working where I, start writing themes without picture and not. Well, it wasn't intentional on his part, but he just decided to bring me in really, really early while they were still cutting in some stuff and doing a whole bunch of work. They had to do a lot of CGI on that, so that took forever, for them. And that's where the year went. They already shot the movie, and it took them a year to get everything together with all the CGI. So that was the only time ever where I've had unlimited time to write the themes. And boy, was that fun.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that was such a pleasure. I didn't have to look at the clock. I didn't have to worry about, oh my God, am I going to meet my deadline? Can I really spend a day on these 4 bars? Yes, I can. Yes, I can. Yeah. Yes, I can, for one. So good. Okay, I'm going to make these next 4 bars just absolutely amazing. So that was really a lot of fun.
As we wrap up, I was wondering if you want to talk a bit about audio impressions and what it is and why you decided to do it, and if it's available to people.
Well, what I impressions is we're first and foremost a music technology company that I started, which is for I created a patented formula for how to do real-time divises on the fly. Like when you have a string section and they got to split up their notes, so the violins play the top note, the second violins play the one underneath, the basses play the bottom note, etc. Well, I came up with a process for how to do all of that, so you could actually just play on the keyboard and actually have the thing do all the correct divisions as you play. Huh. So you're not having to go in there and do one note at a time, especially if you're doing chords and so on. And so I went out and recorded my own samples for the strings, winds, brass, and everything else. And so we're still in development on this. I came out with one thing 5 years ago, which was my first beta system for doing the strings. But in those days, actually, we started like 8 years ago on that one. But it required a lot of computers. It was a very cumbersome beta system. And I sold a couple of those just to try to get, to see how people would fare with it. And it was just too cumbersome. It was my first effort in the field of hiring programmers to put my stuff together. And now we're working on something that's a lot easier for people to use, where it's just a plug-in, and you can do all this stuff just from the plug-in immediately, which you can only really do now with the computers with the power that they've got now. When we first tried that out, you could never have done that as a plug-in. It would have been, and it was, stacks of computers, because they just didn't have the compute power or the RAM to be able to do all that stuff.
Yeah.
So can't talk about too much specifics right now because it'll get me into trouble in terms of my competitors listening in. But hopefully within the next 6 months or a year, I'll be ready to really put something out again that is meant for mass market.
So it's basically going to be a tool for musicians and keyboard pads and MIDIs and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's basically being able. It's really designed primarily for people who are either hobbyists or people who play on stage or like playing live. It's a very much of a performers oriented sample library and sample process.
Yeah,
because you can't really take your conventional, very expensive, $2,000-$3,000 string libraries and just put them under your belt and just go out there and start plunking down chords and play a full string section on stage. It's not really that doable, with conventional sample libraries. Our sample libraries are designed specifically for that kind of thing. So they're designed for people that are going to be playing, that can play, because there aren't any sample libraries out there really until ours comes out that is really designed for performers, not for people just playing one note at a time, which is what typically all sample libraries are made for now.
Has this been road tested on a film score?
Oh yeah, my data system is all over a Phantasm 5.
Chris, I just want to thank you for coming on. I found this very fascinating, and I had a lot of fun talking to you. I appreciate it.
Oh, I had a lot of fun talking to you too. It was very nice talking to you, and you're extremely good questions. In fact, they're so good I can't think of anything I would say, gee, he should have asked me this. Now I can't think of anything.
I of course need to thank Chris Stone for generously lending his time and knowledge to the show. If you've been enjoying the podcast, the book Scored to Death: Conversations with Some of Horror's Greatest Composers is available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and many other places you buy books. Or you can order a signed copy from me directly. Just contact me through scoredtodeath.com. You can also find and follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Scored to Death. Scored to Death, the podcast, is now available on most podcast apps and distribution sites. Please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing the show on iTunes or on whichever provider you use to listen to podcasts. Ratings and reviews will help the podcast get recommended to potential listeners and raise awareness for the show. My other podcast, Saturday Night Movie Sleepovers, can also be found on iTunes, Google Play, and most places you find podcasts, and on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at SatSleepovers. You can find Chris Stone at composerchrisstone.com. And I should note that the short clips of music used in this episode were used strictly to put aspects of the interview into context, to audibly illustrate specific things discussed, and for educational purposes. And the soundtrack discussed on this episode was TaleSpin, which is available on CD from Optical Media International. And also, the soundtrack for The Stupids is available from Entrada. Thank you so much for listening to Scored to Death, the podcast, and please come back in 2 weeks for another in-depth discussion with one of horror's greatest composers.